All right, Manufacturing All-Stars, here we go. Today's guest is no stranger to great food, regardless of the scale at which it's produced. He has a master's in food science and experience in food production ranging from the Fortune 500 to where he is now at Blentech. And by the way, his master's certification also applies to his CrossFit accomplishments. On that note, his competitive spirit has given him a knack for achieving results in whatever role he's been in. And after starting his career as a technical services manager, Dan has moved through the ranks to become CEO of the company where he started, and now leads one of the strongest teams I've come across in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing All-Stars, please welcome Dan Voit to Manufacturing Happy Hour. Good to see you, Dan.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
It's been a little while.
It has.
Yeah.
It has.
What's most exciting you right now before we dive into the real meat of the conversation?
What's most exciting right now?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big question. It can go a lot of different directions, but I think the food industry is a pretty fascinating place right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe historically the food industry wasn't so attractive to a lot of folks, but there's a whole lot of innovation going on, whether it's the alternative protein space, or new food startups, or the implementation of more automation in the production of foods. There's just a whole lot going on that's improving food safety and improving food security, a lot of different things.
And I guess outside of work also, I threw the CrossFit in there also. I'm curious, we usually have some backpacking trips or some exercise things to catch up on. What's shaking in that side of your world right now?
Well, I never really have any shortage of stories on that front. Last week, I went backpacking with my daughters on the Redwood Creek Trail up in Humboldt County. That was a fantastic trip. It's great. Cell phones don't work out there.
Yes.
So,
yes. I have not done. I'll be up in Eureka soon, I think. Not for backpacking, but Lost Coast was I think the last thing I really did up in Humboldt County.
Got it.
You've done that one before, right?
I've done that. Did it with my daughter when she was 6 years old.
All right.
It was all right. That's a tough thing to do.
No kidding. That'll well, you're shaping your company and you're shaping your kids well at an early age, no doubt.
Well, I think that's our responsibility, right?
Yeah. I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Now, I guess just to make sure folks know how to connect with you guys, so Blentech, and that's blend without a D.
That's correct. That's correct. There is a Blendtec.
Yes.
It is not us.
Right.
People frequently confuse that because of their very successful Will It Blend videos.
It's a great marketing campaign.
It really is. It really is. But that isn't us. Our Will It Blend would be very different because our machines are 100 or 1,000 times the size.
Did you ever try to approach them about some collaboration?
I did, and I think for legal reasons, it's not worth discussing here. So,
all right, that's fair. Well, so Blentech, BLENTECH.com. You can also find Blentech Corporation on LinkedIn. And I guess to really dive into the conversation, we'll set the stage. We're here in your office in Santa Rosa, California, in the middle of Sonoma County. And since we deal in a technical industry, I always like to, make it basic for, a non-technical individual that might be listening and learning what Blentech does for the first time. So let's say you're at a winery in Sonoma County and you're meeting with someone that's either in marketing or in a completely different industry, and they're like, Dan, what do you do? What do you tell them?
Yeah. Wow. Well, that question comes up a lot, and it's fun to talk about. I think I maybe can start by talking about what I'm a little interested in, and then transition into what we do. I've always been fascinated by the process of cooking. What our company does is we work with folks who have large-scale cooking, mixing, or food chilling challenges or problems. And we work together with them to develop a process, develop equipment, develop systems, build those systems, automate those systems, start them up, and sometimes optimize or improve systems that are already in place. So we specialize in certain types of foods, for sure. There are a lot of the things that you might have in restaurants that you might think that they're made there. They're often not. They're made in central facilities. Doesn't mean they're lower quality or anything like that. In fact, they're high quality foods produced with care. But we take those processes and we find a way to scale them up and produce them at a larger scale. One of our customers used the term artisan industrial, and that's a phrase that I like. But we build these machines. We design and build these things. We apply the food science expertise, the food engineering expertise, the mechanical engineers, the electrical engineers, and then the field teams that started up, as well as the fabricators, and that's what we do.
Artisan industrial is a term I don't think I've ever heard before.
Yeah.
Was that what drew you here initially, or what got you passionate about food the way you are? Because I think a lot of people, when they think of food, they're thinking either, something farm to table, really specialty, or, something prepared on a mass scale, but that maybe not necessarily the best food in the world you've ever had. But you seem to have this perception of quality across the entire scale.
Yeah, so artisan industrial isn't what got me here, but it certainly helps keep me excited about what's going on in the food space. To answer your question about what got me here, that's a fun thing to talk about. I grew up in Southern California initially, but my father worked in the sugar business. My grandfather was a food scientist, and he worked in a company in the Central Valley called Patterson Frozen Foods that was around back then. It's not around anymore, but it was a huge frozen vegetable factory in Patterson, California.
Okay.
Made a lot of the Bird's Eye products, things like that, back in the 60s and 70s.
Got it. Would that have been before my time? I don't know if I'm familiar with
yeah,
Bird's Eye. Okay.
All right. Well, you must have seen Bird's Eye frozen vegetables. Maybe they don't sell them anymore.
Maybe. I don't know. I just need to keep a better eye out for it. Hopefully some of our listeners know.
Maybe you don't shop in the frozen vegetable aisle. I mean, that's a whole other topic of conversation because I bet, but I'm going to go off on that for a second.
Go for it.
A lot of people tend to think that things like fresh vegetables necessarily are healthier for you or better for you, and that's not necessarily true. Sometimes fresh fruits and vegetables are picked before they're ripe or before they're ready, and then they're put through a long supply chain system, and they may not necessarily have the vitamins or nutrients that sometimes frozen fruits and vegetables have. So anyway, just a little sidebar of a situation. It's not always the case that quote-unquote processed foods aren't as good. It is sometimes the case. It is not always the case. And understanding your food and understanding what makes your food healthy or quality or tasty, and I think that's something that people should do. It's part of living. But I'm going to go back to, you asked about my backgrounds. My grandfather moved down to Guatemala in the 1970s. He actually lived in Nicaragua for a while, and of course that was an exciting place during that period of time. I think Central America, a lot going on historically. In the mid-1980s, my family piled into a Volkswagen van, drove through Mexico, and moved to Guatemala City.
Okay.
We lived right downtown, got an apartment near my grandfather.
Wow.
And he had set up shop doing consulting, building food factories in Central and South America. And of course, my mom helped me with my schooling because it was important to not lose track of that type of stuff during the days. But when there was time, and it was often, I got to go to the office with my grandpa, and he took me to food factories. And this was at a really young age, and it was easy for me to be really inspired by the things that he was able to do. He built big ice cream factories. And, we'd go through the freezer, and he'd let me pick out what I wanted out of the ice cream bins in the back, in the storage. And we'd go through jelly factories, and he'd say, "Hey, Danny, this is how you make a jelly line. Hey, Danny, this is how you make an ice cream line." And,
cool.
He had a room in his house where he had, I don't know, knickknacks, paraphernalia that he had collected from the different places that he'd been when he built food factories or started them up. There's masks on the wall from different tribal regions of different areas of the world and things like that. It's just really exotic. And we'd sit in that room from time to time, and he'd tell me stories, and they just seemed larger than life. And I thought that, wow, if I became a food scientist, if I studied food, I'd get to have some pretty great experiences too, because everybody eats. Yeah. And, that's just one thing that is a shared human experience. No matter what's going on, you wake up, you're going to be hungry today. Yeah. And so it unites people, and it gives you an opportunity to add value anywhere you go. And those were good times sitting there with my grandpa. We sat there listening to music, talking about food factories. Talking about food. Strangest thing. So when I went to college, even going back to high school, I already knew what I was going to do. Sure. And I don't think people do that very often, that they they want to be a food scientist in their teens.
Sounded like it was pretty ingrained in you for a very long period of time.
It's a little strange, and I know that. But in any case, I went to Oregon State. I studied food science, and I got to work for some great people there. And I got to meet this company, after a couple different roles in, some vegetable factories and some fruit factories. But they gave me the opportunity here to demonstrate equipment and do experimental equipment startups around the world. That was my first formal series of assignments here. So I did some pretty interesting projects early on. Things like starting up, as far as we know, was at the time the world's only fully continuous refrigerated sushi line. So it made nigiri blocks and things like that, the actual sushi rice. No excess water, far greener technology, way ahead of its time. Oddly, that went to England of all places. You would have thought it would have gone somewhere else, but that's where it started. Starting up things like industrial stir frying equipment outside of Melbourne, many other things, vacuum cooling technologies in Denmark, and I could come up with some pretty big lists of the places that I've done startups in, whether it's South Korea or Central America, Europe. But in any case, the exposure was fantastic. And indeed, there's a lot going on in food around the world. Yeah. And so that's how I got into it. Artisan industrial is probably a newer concept that I've heard talking about. And I think it's more trending along the lines of maybe people tend to think some negative thoughts about large-scale food production from time to time, maybe more on the coasts than in the Midwest.
Yeah, probably true.
But it's a really unfair overgeneralization and a broad sweeping thing that's not correct. Because there's a whole lot of people that care passionately about what we eat and what they put into that. Just because they make a lot of it doesn't mean they're careless. Yeah. So we like to help that. We like to help feed the world.
Well, that term just stuck out because I've heard you speak before. I know you're really passionate about food, and it certainly comes across in that story from Southern California to Guatemala to Oregon. Man, you've been around, and you had that food heritage running in your family for a long time.
Absolutely.
I'm curious. So where that story kind of ended was while you were on your first stint at Blentech, and you had done some other work in addition to that before coming back here. But was there a point in your career? We're gonna switch a little from that background to kind of the leadership topic. But when did you know you wanted to be the leader of this company?
When did I know I wanted to be the leader? That realization probably began to emerge during the recession period that occurred. Prior to that, in truth, I had no desire to ever seek any kind of a significant leadership role.
Okay. Why was that?
Why did I not have a desire?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There was no appeal, and there's no specific desire to be. I don't know. I don't particularly believe too much in hierarchy structures.
Sure.
I think that titles are maybe useful for identifying what a person is responsible for within a company, but it does not, under any circumstances, correlate with the value that person brings to society or their job. And every job is important, and the idea that one person is better or above another, I don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Where I felt like I wanted to move into leadership was I saw within a team that I cared about, within a company that I cared about, a need for somebody to step in and help transition. So the owner of the company, still the owner, was hoping to move out of active operations as his age was starting to suggest, and somebody needed to step in, and it was easy for me to look around and say, well, if not me, who?
Right.
So it's not wasn't a specific goal. It was an opportunistic need that I stepped into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think if I'm hearing you right, I think we talked a little bit about kind of that dichotomy between being a manager and being a leader in that regard, because, managers are what I usually associate with titles. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have the influence or the willingness to serve in a greater capacity. Right. And I'm curious, was there a moment, because you mentioned the recession, was there a moment during the recession where you're like, I'm the guy that needs to step up? Is there a story behind that where you saw an opportunity to really provide more to the company than you had done before?
Well, I think that was very instinctual.
Okay.
That there were just things that were happening that needed somebody to work on them. And I saw issues that I could address, and those issues had significant impact on really saving jobs. So there was a period of time where the gross profit margins were suffering because productivity wasn't not because people weren't working, because the orders weren't there,
Right.
And, so profits were tough, and businesses survive on cash flow, and that's just the reality of the situation. So we frequently, as we looked for opportunities to, cut costs, or it was really, hey, if we can save this money over here, that's half of this person's job. Or if we can save this here, then that's the other half of this person's job, and then they get to stay. And we knew that in a company like ours, the value that the customer pays for when they buy our goods or our services is the experience that our people have.
Yeah.
And so you cannot approach a situation like this with a cold mindset of, now how many numbers do I need to reduce to get back to the solvency I want to have. You need to approach it with now how do I protect my team members, who are really almost my family members?
Yeah.
Because when the recession ends, and every recession is hard, or in its own way, but when it ends, and they all do, the business comes back, and that comes back to the food thing. No matter what day of the week it is, you're going to eat, and the population's growing, and you need to produce more food tomorrow than you did today, and that's just how life's going to be. So the demand's going to come back.
Yeah.
It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So it's really about protecting and preserving the people that matter, that got you there in the first place. And I think that's how we approached it. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, but that's how we looked at it. We wanted to save our people. We wanted to protect our people. We wanted to preserve our company. And I saw ways of helping to achieve some of that. So that's what I focused on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that ties in with one of the themes of our conversation today, and that's really the culture at Blentech. And I think when that's your attitude, at a leadership level, that would spread throughout the rest of the company, where it's like, hey, this is a tough time, but we're going to find a way for all of us to get through it.
Right.
I'm curious on that note. Let's take a step back into culture a little bit. What would you say? Obviously making it through a tough time like that in a recession, but what would you say really characterizes the culture here at Blentech?
Well, I think the culture is exceedingly innovative, particularly in an industry that is not very forward-thinking from time to time. The food industry can be very traditionalist, for good and bad. But our company really, ignites a fire in people. That's what our culture does, to really find new ways to do something. And as you walked up to my office, you got the wall of patents on the left-hand side, and I think you remember seeing that. But that is an embodiment of just the way we behave and the way we operate, trying to find new ways to do things, trying to do things differently and better. That's who we are. So I think that's a huge component of the culture. And to go back to what we said before, if you're too rigid in the structure or too much hierarchy, it's hard for those innovative ideas to be talked about because they don't necessarily filter up and down chains of communication. You may need to have ideation sessions with a much broader group of people to come up with ideas to improve something. And if you have, politicking or too much hierarchy structure, it doesn't really bode well for the creation of new innovation, in our opinion.
Sure.
So,
I'm curious. Was Because I think innovation and the ability for ideas to spread and be shared is a huge indicator of a strong culture. Would you say it was always that way, or was there an evolution at Blendtec where where your culture has evolved over the years?
No, I think that's the culture that Daryl, the founder, created. I mean, Daryl, the founder of the company, was the inventor of the mechanical grape harvester.
Okay.
And he, most of those patents on the wall, they're him. And there's no mistaking that they were an innovation powerhouse for decades before I joined the company. I just got the opportunity to work in a team that helped me understand how that worked.
Sure.
If I've added any layer to it, it's finding a way to have that same dynamic with a bigger team and do it with the types of technologies that are emerging today, as opposed to 30 years ago. It was about, hey, what new machine can we build? What new manufacturing method can we make to make this stainless steel machine do something faster, better, or whatever. Now it's about how do we make it more usable? How do we make it last longer? How do we bring technology into it in terms of automation and that type of thing?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, I definitely follow it. It sounds like that culture has always had that really strong baseline, and there are little things you can add to that along the way. I'm curious. I'd like to get your take on this because I think there are some companies that don't necessarily have that strong culture from the get-go.
Sure.
How does one impact culture, big or small, in over time or in a short period of time?
Well, all right. So impact culture. I want to write that down and I'm going to address it. But as you were saying that, what came to my mind is the transition of leadership from Daryl to me was probably the typical type of precarious moment in a company's history where those cultures can be lost.
Right.
And if you're adding on top of that a growth curve, because you're bringing in new employees and new customers, the potential to have an erosion in culture or a loss in culture is really, really high, because there's a whole lot of new people and there's a whole lot of new challenges.
Right.
So really the challenge was, how do you build on, improve upon an already good culture while handling a transition across generations? And that in and of itself is a very unique challenge, because you have people that come from broadly different backgrounds. They were raised in different environments. Somebody in their 70s sees the world a little bit differently than somebody in their 20s. That's just the truth. And so you got to bring those people together, and you have to leverage the talents of all the people, whether it's the experience or the energy or whatever. So those were potentially precarious moments. And I think if I have one thing I'm most proud of, I feel as though we navigated that moment well.
Yeah.
How does one impact culture? There's a video that I found was shown in one of the leadership development programs that I was involved in. A gentleman by the name of Cameron Harold. He was I don't know what his exact title was. I think he was the chief operating officer of 1-800-GOT-JUNK.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, I might have his title wrong. He might have been the CEO. He does leadership talks, and I've read his book, Double Double. It's a great book, but he has done this talk over the years, which you can find on YouTube, where he presents what it's like to change a company culture or set the company culture, and he uses a picture of a lone guy dancing at a concert. Have you ever seen this video?
I don't know if I have, but I'm visualizing what you're saying.
Yeah,
so
so just picture one guy at a giant summer music festival, over there on the grass, going crazy, probably with some jam band going on in the background, maybe a 10-minute song where the guitar is going a little bit too long. And he's over there just like dancing and dancing and dancing, and at first he looks crazy, right? But in that video, Cameron takes little sections of the video across time, and at first it's just the one guy, and then a couple more join him.
Okay.
Right?
I think I've seen
and then
something like
then a couple guys leave, but then a couple more come back, and then he points out that after 10 minutes, like 5,000 people get up and start dancing.
Cool.
So what is that? It's modeling the behavior at the leadership level that represents the culture that you want to build, and doing it every day. And at first it feels awkward. You're all alone.
Yeah.
And you just keep doing it because you know that it's right, and not everybody likes it.
Right.
And that's kind of the point, because the objective is to identify people who believe what you believe, who want to build what you want to build,
Right.
and want to be part of that.
Right.
And so, it's divisive in a good way, but it has to be approached with integrity and honesty. So the leaders have to make a conscious effort to become what they want the culture to be. And it starts there.
Yeah.
And that's probably where a lot of people struggle.
Well, I like what you said about how, or at least some of the way I interpret it is with dancing, not everyone's going to want to dance with you, but the people that do want to dance with you, those are the people that you want on your team.
That's
they're
right.
the ones that buy into that vision that you
That's
have.
right. And it's okay that not everybody wants to, because there's a place for everybody in the world, right? But
Right.
So you gotta put it out there what you want the company to be culturally and strategically, and then keep modeling that behavior and keep sending that message. I put out in front of me some of the things that I produce. Here's a brochure that we put out among our staff, and we hand to people when they start. This is what our company is. This is what we do. I've actually used this in interviews before.
Okay.
Not always, but sometimes in an interview, put this down and say, hey, this is what we're doing. You want to be part of this? I'll be back in 15 minutes. Why don't you read it and tell me how you fit into this?
How does that work? I'm curious how that approach works.
Well, I've done it a few times on a few specific positions, and it's been an interesting dialogue. I mean, if you write a detailed description of where you want to go as a company, and you make it compelling, and then you share that with a lot of people, you get the opportunity to identify who wants to do that too.
Right.
And if you keep it up in your head, or you don't communicate it effectively or in a compelling manner, or model the behavior, if you send a conflicting message, I mean, they're not gonna. You're gonna get a random set of people, or you're not gonna be able to filter out the people that really want to do what you want to do. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, one, as an outsider to Blendtec, anytime I walk in the door, I can kind of feel the energy at the company.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you want. Especially when you're coming in for an interview. And I think with any interview, it's pretty, I don't want to say it's easy, but you can kind of tell whether someone's bought in or not, or would jump on into it.
Right.
So,
Right.
No, I love the interview tactic. I know we've got some other things floating around here on the table. But for those of you listening, we're going to take a quick break. We got some more stories coming up. We got some more tactical advice from Dan. We'll be right back. Well, we are back for the second round of the interview. And Dan, I always like to kick off the second part with a story to get folks back into it. So
Do I have to tell the story, or you do?
I'm going to let you tell the story. No, this is not about me. This is about Dan and Blentech.
I was looking forward to leaning back and just hearing a story.
I don't know. That might, if you start a podcast, I'll happily show up sometime and let you lean back. But at least for the time being, you have the spotlight. So,
Got it.
Well, with that, you gave a great example, like when you were kind of coming into your leadership role when the recession was taking place. I'm curious, and there's a second part to this question, but the first part is, tell me about a time where, or maybe the better way to start is, I feel like the indicator of a company's culture is how well they perform in a time of crisis. Can you give me another example of where the strength of your culture just really shined through during a challenging situation?
Sure. There are many, but I think there's one specific day and the week that followed that I don't know that I'll ever get eclipsed with respect to how people came together and took care of each other. And that's when the fires hit in Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was chaos that day. I don't know exactly how many homes were lost, but many of the people in our company lost their homes, including our director of operations and the owner. And we had a full factory at that time too. So not only do we have, loss of homes, we weren't sure if there was loss of life. and we had business issues to deal with as well, because not everybody lives in Santa Rosa, and customers still want us to deliver and perform. On the first day of the fire, people came together. The accounting team quickly pulled up a list of all of our employees and tracked who was safe. Who couldn't come in because there were road closures everywhere, and there were all sorts of different things going on. And then within about 24 hours, we began to make a plan for how we were going to get back into production. And we had a huge shipment that was scheduled to ship the week after that was occurring. It was actually down in our final assembly area. It was a multi-million-dollar system designed to produce school lunches. It was going to be installed in the Midwest.
Okay.
And we needed to figure out how to come together when this was all coming, going on around us, and still get production done. And the company didn't have to ask or instruct anybody to come into work. They just did, because they knew it's what we needed to do.
Yeah.
So if you were in a position where you were not safe, or you couldn't come in, or you needed to take care of your family, those people didn't come in. But the people that weren't in those situations came in and filled in for others.
Yeah.
And that meant other people stepping up and doing jobs they don't normally do, or stepping in to make sure that the shipment came out. It was really an all hands on deck moment. And we pulled it off, and we got the shipments. We might have been 7 or 8 days behind the original schedule, but given what occurred, it's unreal.
That is like you said, unreal is the exact word I was going to use too.
And I don't, I think it was a hard moment for everybody, but not because the company made it a burden. My perspective was that this is what people wanted to do. They knew that at the end of the day, the business is important to all of us, and if we're gonna rebuild our homes and a community and things like that, business is one of the bedrocks, is one of the foundations upon which we have the money and the ability to do that type of thing. So keeping ourselves healthy was going to help build our future. So that's, I think, maybe the most compelling moment with respect to demonstrating what a caring, connected culture looks like.
No kidding.
And I don't think I'll come up with a better story than that.
No, I was going to say that kind of tops it. In fact, I wanted to ask you, when were you most proud of your team? But I have a feeling that might be it. But I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I don't know. They've got many. I don't know that I can rate moments of pride on a scale of 1 to 10. That was certainly a proud moment. I mean, there's been technical achievements where I've stood back and I've looked at a line that we've created or a technology that we've created, and I'll just say, wow, look what they did. And those moments tend to happen after the lights turn off in the factory. Everybody's gone. Maybe I'm walking through the factory. It's quiet. You can hear the echoes of your footsteps. And I think the kind of feeling I'm talking about. Then you walk over to final assembly, and you see these machines. Sometimes they're 20 feet tall, and millions of dollars worth of equipment, all carefully connected, integrated, designed to work together. And you say, wow, look what we created. And when you do the math on how much food it produces and how many people get fed by those systems, you kind of get awestruck. Things making 10, 20,000 pounds per hour, running 24 hours a day, or nearly 20 hours a day. They got to stop and clean them, but you're talking a lot of food. You're talking 200,000 pounds in a day. Break that down into meals. We're feeding significant portions of the population with the technology that we create.
I think that's a big part with manufacturing. You really need to look at what it impacts at the end of it, because you could show up to Blentech, for example, and be welding equipment, but it's really, what is that equipment going to do? How's that going to impact humanity? That really does the trick. How do you I love your example of walking through the plant and having that or I should say the facility, and having that sense of pride. How do you instill that vision in others so that other people feel that same sense and have that same sense of the commitment to the company?
Well, I think they that goes back to the beginning of finding people that are inspired by that in the first place. But I think that means acknowledging the work that people do along the way, and I do my best to do that. I'm sure I can do a better job because I'm human, but you know, that means maybe walking into somebody's office and saying, "Hey, great job on,
Yeah.
you know, great job on whatever specific role you had in it," and that from a leadership perspective means genuinely understanding what that person did. It cannot be an artificial compliment. Artificial compliments actually do more damage than they do help.
Sure.
So genuinely understand what they did, genuinely care about the role that they played, and then give a genuine compliment. And those are, I think, appreciated to a degree that, I don't know, nobody wants a, "Hey, good job," and it comes across as phony.
Yeah, an attaboy where you just slap him on the back and you're out of there.
That's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. It needs to, you got to have a little integrity and a little bit of, I don't know, empathy behind that.
Well, I think it comes with a balance. You want to provide constructive criticism and challenge someone to reach their full potential where possible, and you want to balance that out with, you know, genuine compliments.
Sure.
I guess I'm curious, how, as a leader of a company, how do you carve out time or make sure that's a priority every day? Because I think a lot of leaders I've seen in manufacturing, I should maybe go back to the manager term, managers in manufacturing really get caught up in the day-to-day, and they don't have time for not only the strategic stuff, but the things that really enhance that culture.
Yeah. Well, the strategic stuff is a whole subject in and of itself.
Sure.
And probably worthy of multiple 1-hour podcasts.
Yes.
But the system that we employ for staying in touch and understanding the accomplishments of individuals is to have periodic scheduled one-to-ones with between leaders and direct reports. And so, you know, I personally have maybe about 25% of my time is spent in one-to-one meetings with direct reports, understanding what their struggles are, what their challenges are, and then having a robust communication about whether it's celebrating their successes or identifying opportunities for further improvement. Usually it's a mix of the both, right? So how do you carve out the time? The truth is you just choose to. I mean, it's not unlike anything else. I mean, I mentioned, or you mentioned before that I've been involved in CrossFit, and I coach CrossFit, and I coach people for Spartan races and things like this as well. And when people come into our gym and they say they don't have time for fitness, I mean, the truth is it's BS.
Yeah.
I mean, am I allowed to say that on a podcast?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, you got, the nice thing about podcasting is you got this little explicit thing you can hit if you need need to. So I don't think BS qualifies as hitting the explicit button.
Right on.
You're great.
Cool. So if you bring it back to, you know, modeling the behavior.
Right.
Yeah. You're going to model the behavior that you think is important. What you choose to put on your calendar is what you think is important.
Right, 100%.
And if you choose to let somebody else dictate your calendar, or you choose to be, you know, blown around the wind like a plastic bag in the wind, you know, or something like that, then you won't be able to chart out the vision that you specifically want, and you won't be able to control it that way. And if you step back at your calendar, you really honestly try to keep your calendar up to date, go back and look at it, see where you spent your time, whether you realize it or not, that's what you value. So if you want to value culture building, you have to allocate time to culture building.
Love that. And
that involves lots of direct interaction, but it also involves maybe some company speeches and things like that, a mix of a lot of different things. And through that, your team will see, hey, he or she values this time with me. I should value the time with my peers or my direct reports or whatever. And hopefully that becomes, you know, infectious.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Is that how you communicate your vision then throughout the company?
Like you mean one-to-one?
Or you mentioned one-to-one, you mentioned company speeches. How do you clearly and consistently communicate a vision?
Well, I try to, you know, go across all those channels. I do produce documentation, a lot of it, but it's not in the form of, hey, here's a spreadsheet for the you know, the financials that we're going to hit. The financials are an important part of the business, and they're you know, at the end of the day, what power the business. But people don't buy from you because you have a good bottom line. They don't buy from you because you have a good top line. They buy from you because you create products that they want, you service it the way they want, and you're there for them when they need them, or you provide something they can't get anywhere else in the world. So our visions are more often communicated in the form of stories about what the future is likely to look like.
Okay.
And what our future is going to be.
Yeah.
And if you come back to, I'm going to use probably lots of athletic, corollaries.
No, it's perfect.
If you come back to, what a professional athlete might do, not that I am one, I'm far from it, but they, if they're getting up to do a heavy Olympic lift, or they're getting up to, start a, fast marathon or something like that, they're envisioning their victory.
Yeah.
Right. They're envisioning a win at that point, and they're envisioning accomplishing the best that they can get. And so in business, it isn't any different. You have to envision what you want the future to be, and you have to share that vision with everyone around you because they're going to help you. That's a pretty simple concept. It's just hard to do in practice because egos come into play. And what's going to happen, just like it does in athletics, is sometimes you're going to get to that starting line. You're going to envision, getting a PR on your, on your half marathon time or something.
Right.
And that day's not going to go so well for you.
Yeah.
And you're not going to hit it, or somebody's going to be faster.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you quit. And it also doesn't mean you spend a ton of time beating yourself up. You get back to recovery, you make a new plan, you strategize, and you get a little better. You can't do that in a company or really anywhere unless you have a foundation of trust.
Yeah.
If within your company people are politicking or opportunistically seeking to, the founder of the company always used to say he watches out for people who try to raise their bucket by lowering someone else's, is what he calls it. If that's going on, you don't have trust. And if you don't have trust, you can't have safe visioning because when it doesn't succeed, finger pointing is going to start. And when that happens, you won't be able to repeat the exercise and learn from it because there won't be honest learning. There'll be clawing for power structures.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the guy's name was Tom Wujek? It's a TED talk about the Marshmallow Experiment.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah.
With the pasta and the marshmallows.
Fill me in. Yeah, I'm trying to remember how that goes.
Cool. He has run these workshops where I don't know exactly how many pieces of dry spaghetti you take, but it's dry spaghetti and they give them a certain amount of tape and some string and then a marshmallow. And the goal of this team is to build the tallest structure that can support a marshmallow. And dry spaghetti is pretty fragile, so it's a hard thing to do. And he talks in that video about how people, they spend a lot of time coming up with the perfect design, and a lot of times at the end they put the marshmallow on top, and then just the tower falls, right? And if my data is not mistaken, I probably have to double check this, but kindergartners outperform business school graduates because business school graduates are clamoring to create a hierarchy during the period of time when they need to be iterating in a non-judgmental environment.
Interesting. I don't doubt that
Yeah.
statistic either. If it's not true, I'm hoping it is.
Yeah, the only one that outperformed it was like structural engineers or architects or something. And his
Dang.
point was like, well, thank goodness, because that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But
That's your main calling in life, and that's what you're paid to do. Hopefully you get that right.
I sure hope you can build a structure. That's the iteration. So it's coming up with a concept. It's quickly testing the concept. It's allowing that concept to fail. And then when it fails, not trying to take advantage of that situation for your own personal gain, to learn from that as a team. And that is really hard for people to do.
Yeah. I've seen it before. I have no doubt what you're talking about right there.
Yeah.
Wow, there are a lot of different directions I could take this part of the conversation. As I'm thinking about it, one thing I'm curious about, because we're nearing the end of the second half of the interview. I want to leave the folks with some tactical information. So a few questions around that. We talked about that foundation of trust. We talked about carving out time like you do with the gym and looking at how you're using your time. And that's an activity I've been doing, not just creating my calendar moving forward, but actually looking back and adjusting what I did with my calendar to see where my time actually went. So I think that's a huge piece. But on top of that, it's about creating time for the important activities. And I'm curious, how do you invest in your success? How do you invest in yourself? How do you invest in your team's success as well, too, to keep you guys sharp and cutting edge and being proactive?
How I invest in it. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to tackle that question.
Not necessarily a financial investment either.
No, I know. In fact, that's not where my head went at all. I was thinking
I should have known we were on the same
yeah,
page.
No,
It's
really about how to allocate my time and my energy, right?
Yeah.
And the financial investment is just one manifestation, or it's like one tool that you have that you can utilize. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I keep a pretty strict schedule for myself personally.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do to stay grounded with respect to where I want to take the company is once a month I take an entire day where I focus only on evaluating myself against the goals that I set for leadership. So there's a spreadsheet I keep, and my goals for the year in terms of leadership development, business goals, but they span beyond that. They're not just about that. They're also about my whether it's my goals in the gym or at home with my family, my kids, because the whole person comes to work every day. Yeah. And I know it's supposed to be, we're supposed to do our jobs, and then we say that this is business, and personal and business, you need to keep them separate. But the truth is the whole person shows up, and if the whole person's healthy, then the business is healthy. And so I check in with myself once a month. I grade myself on those goals in a red, yellow, green. I calculate the percentage of goals that I've completed, and then I strategize each month for how I'm going to improve it in the next month.
Cool. Love that.
And I've done that now for a few years, about 4 or 5 years. And they're important days for me. It's really easy to start saying, well, maybe I should blow off that and take that conference call. Yeah. Or like there's that big potential customer meeting. Maybe I'll score that order if I do this, or maybe whatever the excuse is. But this is a long game. There's a prominent business speaker by the name of Simon Sinek, and he has recently been talking about business being the infinite game. It's really about how long can you stay in? How long can you keep that energy up? So it's so much like a marathon. It's so much like a distance race. Wake up every day, have enough energy to tackle the next day. Not just come out of the gate hot and then run out of steam after 6 months, a year, 5 years. Those short plays, no, I don't think that works in the long run. That's not how you create something that has lasting value. Maybe you can flip a profit if you're lucky, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah, those are usually short-term profits that you're flipping at that point.
And I don't think that helps people.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how people can adopt a longer-term perspective? I know it's a big question, but I'm just curious. How do we get people out of thinking quarterly, yearly, and thinking 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
I think they got to stop thinking about the goal as the end. So we during the break, I think we talked a little about. I was using that example of somebody wanting to do a heavier deadlift or Olympic lift or something like that. And I train people for CrossFit from time to time, and maybe they want to come in and they want to do a 400-pound deadlift or something like that, and maybe they only do 300 pounds today. You have to set these goals in order to create a benchmark for where you want to go. But the goal really is connected to some broader sense of what you want to accomplish. So what if somebody says they want to deadlift 400 pounds, what it really means is they want to feel stronger. Yeah. Right. So if they just finally work their way up, maybe they make that plan and they break it into sections, and they might, 6 programs across X number of months, and they get from 300 to 400 and they do it. They just quit because they did it. they're done now, or was their goal to be a stronger human being really the goal? So at the start of each year, in addition to the monthly check-ins, I spend one day thinking about what I personally want to accomplish in terms of growth for my contribution in the world and myself, right? So a lot of times that's, what do I want to accomplish in a conceptual sense? And then I break that down to goals.
Right.
Those things don't really change, right? Maybe you want to be a stronger human being. Maybe you want to be a more compassionate human being. Maybe you want to be more technically adept or something like that. Each person has their own thing, and and then it's the activities that they make their goals on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or an annual basis that helps them continuously fulfill that longer term goal.
For sure.
And so it means stop, just because you break things down into SMART goals, stop pretending the SMART goals are the end.
Right.
They're just the means to the end. They're that one program that you do between 300 and 400 pounds on your deadlift.
It's that measurable step along the journey.
Right. But every time you finish that one, you have to have another one lined up. Or if you don't have one, then sit there and line it up. But if you don't understand why you're doing it in the first place, you don't have an intrinsic reason for wanting to accomplish it. Maybe you're doing it because somebody else told you to. You're not going to keep it going. It's not going to matter to you. So that, of course, comes back to why you want to try to attract people in the company that share the belief. If they believe what you believe and they share that specific objective, longer term, they're probably longer term going to want to make SMART goals that align with the types of things that you want to do. And they're probably going to come up with new goals that are probably more likely to be aligned with what you want to do. And then you just have a lot of dialogue together. You innovate together, and it becomes fun. And so, yeah. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. So the question I have on that is, you have habits for like yearly reflection. You have your monthly reflection days. Is there a way people can replicate that tool or resource that kind of has that same thing that allows them to create that system in their life?
How they can replicate it?
Yeah,
you mean like a specific tool or something like that?
I'm just curious if you did have one, or because it sounds homegrown, but I'm curious what you'd recommend if someone wanted to take action on that and be like, I need to develop a monthly reflection day, or I need to take time to think about how my annual goals fit into my longer term perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think that everybody's brain works a little differently, and so there are different tools that work for different people. At the foundation of it all, if you want to have long-lasting impact that you control and direct, you have to be capable of setting and maintaining habits.
Yep.
And that's a very easy place to start. I personally really, really love Post-its.
Post-its, all right.
And that's how I bring my ideas around. So when I'm doing my ideation, I have the habit to schedule that time and make it a priority. That's the habit. And then the structure that I employ, honestly, is to get a cheap piece of cardboard and I put it up against a wall, and then I get a stack of Post-its and some Sharpies.
Yeah.
And you probably walked and saw the Post-its on your way up here.
I notice them every time I come in.
I have a bit of an obsession with Post-its, and there's people here that love it and people that hate it. But what it allows you to do is completely freeform thinking and get lots of different ideas that might seem convergent and bring them together and see how they fit spatially.
Yeah.
So that means writing down initially, what are those long-term feelings or objectives? Be a stronger leader, or this or that. Those feelings that you want to be able to generate, and then the different goals that could be a priority within your year, and then categorizing them. So it looks a lot like a matrix. I mean, I could draw it here, but it's not going to show up on a podcast format. But on the left-hand side, you got those high-level long-term goals. Right. And those aren't necessarily SMART goals.
Yeah.
They're conceptual. Right. And then along the top, if you picture a spreadsheet, you got your column one, and then you got your top row. You got the different buckets of your life. You got your leadership, you got your family, you got your business, maybe you got your friends. You could decide what those important buckets of your life are, but there's only 4 or 5. We're not that broad.
Sure.
And then you assign goals that work for each of those in your life. So if you're looking to be a stronger, be a stronger individual, how can you be a stronger leader? How can you be a stronger person in your family? How can you be a stronger person around your friends? How can you be a stronger person in the gym or something like that? What does that mean to you? So you then create a SMART goal in and around achieving that specific objective in that category of your life. And from there, you can then just begin to track it monthly. That's where the habits come back in.
Yep.
So then you have clarity that what you're working on is working towards the things that you want to become. And then you just need patience.
Yeah.
And maybe a little forgiveness.
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like you've got a blog post inside of you just waiting to come out to outline this Dan Voit process to long-term thinking.
Maybe.
We're nearing the end here. I guess you mentioned Simon Sinek earlier. I feel like we've talked about him a couple times.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
When you and I have met before. What's a resource you'd recommend to people that are looking to be better leaders, building better cultures within a company?
There's a lot of different ways to tackle that, but I mean, the first thing is to get out there and learn from other leaders in broad different environments. So I got involved in some CEO advisory groups and got to get to know CEOs of other businesses and understand how they function, and that really exposed me to broader perspectives, people that run very different businesses, whether it's, telecommunication or construction or banking or different types of manufacturing. How do they think? How do they approach it? And so get out there and find some kind of a program that allows you to explore the range of human talent, skill, and leadership styles, and stay open to the idea that there is no one template. It's an infinite number of possibilities of things that you can achieve. And so it's carving out the things that works for you.
Right.
There's a leadership style for every personality type. And there aren't really personality types. There's just personality spectrums, right? So there are leadership styles that you can develop, and you can develop multiple leadership styles that are used in different environments. Sometimes you need to have an authoritative style. Sometimes you need to have a consultative style. Sometimes you need to have an empathetic style. It depends on the situation and what it needs. So leadership's a science and art, and it also means getting out there and seeing what people do.
Sure.
Learning from that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I love what you brought up about getting out to other industries as well. Because especially for a audience that's primarily manufacturers listening to this, it's really important to see how other people are doing it. Because really, most businesses have the same problems and challenges they're trying to address.
That's absolutely true. Well, they're all human at their core. At least in the C levels or even the managerial levels, the problems are all generated, in my opinion, almost exclusively by human interactions.
Yes.
It's miscommunications. It's and so just because you work in manufacturing this widget or that widget or whatever, there's still an amalgam of people. So.
What's one of the last books or podcasts that has really made an impact, or that you thought would be valuable for people that are on these journeys to check out?
Oh man, I try to read a book a month, so that's not an easy thing to answer. I've got in front of me the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni.
Okay.
I've used that book heavily with our team to stay aligned with what makes for a healthy team dynamic. In that book, in the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick lays out 5 things that can go wrong within a team, and he does it in a storybook fashion. And have you ever read the book?
I actually haven't. This is the first time I'm seeing this one.
You need to read it. Maybe
I will.
I'm just going to give you that copy. But
love it.
The first whole beginning of it is it's written like it's a story. It's not a typical business book. So it's this about a CEO that steps in, and there's some problems within the culture. And so there's each person has a name, and they have narrate meetings and things like this. It's not like reading a self-help book.
Sure.
At least not in the beginning portion of it. And so it demonstrates the 5 dysfunctions that come up, and they happen to be, in this case, absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. And so as a team, you come together and you recognize when those dynamics are at play. If any one of those dynamics begins to erode.
Mm-hmm.
And at any point in time, one team is, higher on one scale, or maybe they're great on absence of trust, but they're, really screwing up on fear of conflict. So they trust each other, but they're not willing to have constructive conflict. Mm-hmm. That happens all the time. That then affects the team. So reviewing that and working on that with your leadership teams, I think is a pretty changing thing to do. Mm-hmm. Personally, I just finished reading David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. If you know who David Goggins is, he was a Navy SEAL, endurance athlete.
I've read different Navy SEAL authored business books before, but I don't think I've come across that one.
He's got a specific grit and power with respect to how he approaches life that I think really helps maintain focus. Mm-hmm. He talks about callousing your mind and staying willing to do things that make you really uncomfortable.
Got it.
And if you're wanting to model behavior or induce change, expect to be uncomfortable socially. Mm-hmm. And that shouldn't be that hard to do, but for some reason it is for us. So you might want to get ready for that.
All right. Well, I will have both of those books linked up in the show notes. Dan, is there anything you wish I would have asked you during this interview that I haven't yet?
I don't know.
I'd say this is just your opportunity to bring in anything up. You're like, man, Chris, you really missed the ball on this one earlier.
I don't know. I mean, we could have talked about my technologies. We could have talked about what's going on with the company, but
that wasn't the last question. That's just to fill in the gap before that.
I got to plug my stuff.
Well,
too,
exactly.
Right?
Well, that's as we wrap up, Dan. What is next for Blentech? What are you most excited about that's coming down the pipeline for you and your company?
Yeah. I'm really excited about the way these cloud-based technologies are becoming readily available, mm-hmm. and easily adapted for our types of equipment. We've developed mm-hmm. a cooker cloud platform that does some pretty advanced evaluation of how effective a production room is in the mm-hmm. food space. Very much designed kind of the way an athlete might use Strava for optimizing their running or mm-hmm. their triathlon performance, breaking down those sections into discrete benchmarks mm-hmm. and allowing for that iterative improvement that, we were talking about with goal setting, but then applying it to the production floor so that you can really drive continuous improvement mm-hmm. as a business. We're really excited about that. And I don't see that type of technology exists in the food space right mm-hmm. now. And so we think we've really broken through on that. So we're pretty excited about that.
Cool. Well, I love all the parallels you've drawn throughout the episode, from fitness to business. I will link up to Blentech in the show notes as well. Again, that's BLENTECH. In the meantime, Dan, thanks so much for being on the show today.
You bet. Thanks.
And for those of you listening, we'll catch you here again on Manufacturing Happy Hour next time. Stay innovative, stay thirsty.